Continue. So we want to welcome everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us for part one of a three-part workshop series on establishing your digital identity. This workshop series is being supported by the Gilliam Fellowship, I will say that. And if you want to learn a little bit more about it, Franklin Hall, who's a recipient of the Gilliam Fellowship, is here with us today. He's going to introduce our guest speaker. Maybe he'll say a few words about it now, or maybe if you have a question at the very, very end for him, he'd be kind enough to answer them. But again, welcome. We're still working on the next two workshops, so we'll be in touch with you later when that information becomes available. But I just want to say a few things about the workshop series, just so you have a better idea of what they're about. There we go. So this workshop series is dealing with growing your digital identity and really focusing on your professional identity, of course. And so we want you to be able to grow your presence, in the field, among current and then future employers, and as well as the public. And so I'm a very visual learner and an educator. So that's why I had to put up this little Venn diagram here to kind of better able to explain kind of what our ideas are behind this. So to this workshop, we're kind of focusing on your peers today, which is why we're focusing on scholarly identifiers, and that we have an expert here today about that. But again, we want to focus on your employers, and I think about the public. And when we get to that topic, when I think about the public, there is the general public. You're going to be an expert in a field about something. So there are people who fall in that general public may also include people like me who are reporters or journalists, and we're reporting on a topic and we need an expert in the field, and it's easier to find you if you're out there online and you're talking about your research. You're also going to be interacting with the public in terms of like policymakers, people who are on Capitol Hill or in your state right now, or in your local government making big decisions and legislation about the public. So you might be interacting with them and giving them important information on decision making as it comes to public health. We also want you to be visible to funders too. You're doing important work and we want them to find you easily. We want them to give you money. So we want to make sure you're out there and visible and easy to find. So we're hoping in all of the topics that we discuss in these workshops will touch upon these 3 points, but they're not just one strictly for one topic. Like scholarly IDs are not just for your peers. The public can use them, employers might use them too. So they all kind of overlap with each other. And your digital identity is just out there and it's just going to continue to grow. And we want you to be able to, voice your own brand and hone your own skills and just thoughtfully shape your digital presence. And I think what we all want to emphasize the most here is we want you to do this while you're in school. We don't want you to wait 6 months before you're about to graduate, and you're trying to find a job and maybe finish writing a thesis and trying to move and dealing with a pandemic. We want you to be able to do this while you're in graduate school so that it's all set, ready to go. You're very active out there. So by the time you graduate and you find a job, you already have this lovely history and presence already out there, establishing yourself as an expert in your field. So we want to give you the skills now to start doing that. We realize you are very busy people, but working in like little baby steps, maybe between experiments, when you have 10 minutes here and there, that you can start building up your profile in these different platforms that we'll talk about today and talk about the whole as the workshop. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. That was just my little plug on that. So I'm going to hand it off to Franklin Hall, and he's going to say a few words about himself, and he's going to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Gina, and thank everybody for coming out today. So I'm Franklin Hall. I'm a rising fifth year BME PhD student in the Correct Lab. As Gina pointed out, I do have the Gilliam's Fellowship, and please feel free to ask me any questions you might have. After this, you can certainly email me and I can give you any insight into the application process or just the program itself. this is a 3-part workshop, and this is the first part. So we're really excited to have Robin and Sin with us today. She's currently the coordinator of the Office of Scholarly Communications at the Sheridan Library here at JHU. And in this capacity, she provides researchers and students information about the changing kind of academic publishing system. And she's been with JHU for 15 years, starting as a science librarian and working with 4 KSAS departments. And before arriving at JHU, she held a variety of library positions at Bowling Green State University, University of Toledo, and the Academy of Natural Sciences, Philadelphia. So with that, we're very excited to have Robin here with us to kind of help us on our journey of establishing a very outgoing digital presence. Thank you.
And unmute. Hi, thank you, Franklin, and welcome everybody for the afternoon. So let me share my screen. Oops. There we go. Okay. And let's go. There we go. All right. So, as Franklin said, I'm Robin. Now, because even after 1.5 years of this, I'm still not good at multitasking while I'm talking. So if you have questions, holler at me or write them down or stick them in the chat, but I can't really see the chat while I'm talking. So if you do want me to pause and answer a question, I'm more than happy to, but just say something and I'll stop talking. So we're here to talk about scholarly author identifiers as part of this series to get everything going. So when you think about scholarly identifiers, what's traditionally been the identifier for authors is a name, and that doesn't uniquely identify anybody, I think. I mean, there's probably examples where someone has a totally unique name that no one else has ever had, but those are few and far between. So names are not unique and they're not static. You know, people change their names for a variety of reasons, and everybody needs to be able to keep up with that, including the computer systems. And now, since we're in what's becoming a more and more linked digital world, that information needs to be passed among different systems so that those identifiers all mean the same thing in the same system and they're treated in appropriate ways. So there are persistent identifiers for a whole raft of things, from grants to, I mean, when you think about it, the DOI that identifies journal articles is a persistent identifier, or a PID. And so more and more often, these are being used to make systems more reliable, more accurate, and make it faster so that people, whether it's you as the author or the grant funder or someone at the institution that just hired somebody, doesn't need to sit and rekey everything. So that's why they're important, and it's going to make things hopefully going forward a little more reliable. There are many kinds of PIDs out there, and let's see. There is this wonderful infographic that doesn't show up very well on the screen. I'm sorry about that. But this is looking at the research cycle and all the different persistent identifiers that are used in them. So like when a grant is awarded, there needs to be a DOI. There needs to be an ORCID ID, which we're going to talk about in a minute, for identifying an author. There needs to be a ROR, which is a research organization identifier, so that the NIH or the CDC or the DOE or Johns Hopkins or Harvard can be identified accurately. We were working with a librarian from the Welch Medical Library, and I were working with one of the indexers from Scopus a while ago. And if people have to type into a free text field where they work, it's never going to be the same. Nobody can type Johns Hopkins accurately, or JHU, or as you know, researchers don't really identify with the university here so much. They identify with their school. So they put the School of Medicine or the Bloomberg School of Public Health, and they leave off Johns Hopkins totally. So that's why we need these identifiers, because humans filling in a text field doesn't give accurate information at all. So identifying you as an author is what ORCID does, which is the, oh, I'm going to forget what it is. Something, the researcher and contributor ID. And so publishers and funders, institutions, management groups are all starting to require this ORCID. Sometimes publishers will demand it when you first enter their manuscript submission system and you're submitting your manuscript. They want to know at least an ORCID for the corresponding author, if not ORCIDs for everybody, because they also see the benefit to them of having their authors uniquely and appropriately identified. So what ORCID does for you is it gives you that number, like your social security number as a researcher, so that everybody knows who you are. And it's not like, in my case, the Robinson in California who does ophthalmological research. I am not that person. So we need to use these ORCIDs, and you need to spend some time actually managing them. So it will take some of your time, but ORCID is simply a registry. Information can be added to it by you. You can set it up so that other groups can add information, but only if you approve of that. Nobody will ever be able to add information that you don't see. It's free. It's not linked to a particular institution. It's got a governing board, so it's going to tick over, and it's an ongoing organization. So it's something that will persist. It is a persistent identifier. It's not something, you know, somebody made up in a garage somewhere and then 2 people used it and then it died. So it's not that. So let's go look at, whoops, an ORCID from Dr. Spangler. So you can add a lot of information yourself if you want, like, so Dr. Spangler typed all this biography in or cut and pasted it from something else. You can add links that you want, but your ORCID ID looks like this. It's actually a link that will get anybody to this page. And then Dr. Spangler can decide to give permissions to places like Crossref or Scopus or Web of Science, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, to add information to this site.
Robin, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
And I see Franklin raising his hand. Is there any way you can share what this page looks like on your end? Because we just see the like your PowerPoint. Is there any ways? Because sometimes
Yes, I thought I was.
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I thought I was. So let me see.
Yeah, you may have to stop saving and like stop sharing and then share again.
Oh, your Zoom is set up differently than mine. It makes me choose one application, and I want to jump in and out of different applications.
Oh no.
And I don't see a way to share just my screen.
Oh, it's not letting you share your screen at all?
No. I mean, I can share just my browser or just my inbox or just Teams or my calendar, but it doesn't let me share whatever I see on my screen. And that's always an option when I do that, when I do a Zoom.
Oh, I am sorry. Let me see if there's anything I can quickly see. No, not at the moment.
Okay. All right, then I might have to stop sharing and start sharing several times. I'm sorry if that gets, that's the only way I can see going forward. So now can you see Jamie's ORCID page?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So this is what an ORCID looks like. Over here in the green is Dr. Spangler's preferred name, the ORCID ID, which is basically a URL to get you to this page, the biography. Under this link here for researchers are all the how-tos. I'm not talking so much about how to do this. Where do I click and what do I do? That's for you to do later. This talk is more about why persistent identifiers for you are important and the different kinds that are available to you. Um, so there's several sections in an ORCID registry page. There's employment. So Dr. Spangler works at Johns Hopkins, and the source for this information is Dr. Spangler, because we don't have that ROR integration set up with like the employment system here at Hopkins and ORCID. So Hopkins can't tell ORCID that Dr. Spangler works here. Dr. Spangler has to tell them. And then there's ways, education, and then funding is interesting if you can see these, because Dr. Spangler had to add this grant information, but this first grant information came from Proposal Central. So here's where it's coming. This saved Dr. Spangler from rekeying. Proposal Central said, I've been given permission to update Dr. Spangler's information, and this grant is going forward. So I'm going to add this information to Dr. Spangler's ORCID. Works is, there we go. Works is the part of the record that talks about what you've published, chapters and books, conference papers, journal articles. This is where a lot of the setting up those pipes, between this ORCID and Crossref or whatever will help you, because these first few articles are all from Crossref. So again, Dr. Spangler didn't have to type this. They did a search in Crossref and said, these are all mine, send them all to my ORCID, and here they are. If you go down further, here we go. Scopus is one of the big indexes of articles in journals. And so Dr. Spangler also said, Scopus can update my record, and this article Scopus found instead of Crossref finding it. So it gives you a nice looking page with it's basically a list. It's a registry. It's not a profile. It's not research.edu, or it's not academia.edu, and it's not ResearchGate. It's just for allowing you to have one page where all the pipes can come in and connect all this information, and other people can see what is assigned to you, and you know that it's all right. That's the point and purpose of ORCID. Okay, so let's go back here and whoops. So something else you're probably familiar with are Google Scholar profiles. And it is a profile. It does something like what ORCID does, but instead of linking to other sources of information, it's all built on Google's giant database and Google's algorithms, which we don't have a way to look into. That's a fine thing. I have a Google Scholar profile, and I keep it updated. But it's a little more network focused. If you're someone who's interested in building a network of people who know what you're doing and you want to know what they're doing, Google Scholar is probably more what you need. But Google Scholar doesn't interact with ORCID. It doesn't interact with publishers or things like that. It's the only information it has is based on the data it pulls from the web. Okay, it's easy to set up. You just need a Google account. So far it's free. You never know how long that will last. It assigns articles to you, so you need to watch it and prune it so that the articles by people with similar names don't end up in your profile. It does include non-research articles, which, as Gina was saying earlier, if you end up working in education or policy around science and engineering, you may want those non-research articles. If you write an editorial for the trade magazine, or you write something for the local paper, you want it in there because that's the kind of work you're doing. It'll be harder to get that kind of work into ORCID, but you can do it. So let's go look at a Google Scholar profile. I think I'm getting the hang of this. So this is Dr. Arroyo's Google Scholar profile. And again, there's a whole list of articles that he has authored. Tells you how many articles have cited it, and you can actually go and look at it. It's much more interactive than an ORCID. An ORCID will lead you to the article itself, but it doesn't track citations or anything like that. It generates lots of metrics if you're interested in those kinds of things. It gives you a nice little graph. Google tries to tell you how many of your articles are openly available and not behind a paywall, because many grant funders think that's important and require that. Dr. Arroyo had to agree to have all the co-authors listed here. You can follow Dr. Arroyo by clicking on this. He can follow you. So while it's focused on publishing, it also provides metrics. It provides some level of social networking ability, but it's all only provided by Google. That's the only place the information can come from, is Google. Whereas ORCID tries to pull information from lots of different approved sources, because you're the one who has to approve those sources. Okay. So we've got ORCID, the linking part. We've got Google Scholar, more networky. Now we can talk about a couple of the pre-Google Scholar companies had to do the indexing for the articles in journals and book chapters and books. Two are large and very focused on science and engineering. One is Scopus and one is Web of Science, or WOS. They are two very large indexes that do all the citation tracking and generation of metrics based on your publications. So they are also working on that whole author disambiguation problem. Is this John Smith the same John Smith as that John Smith? And what about Judy Brown, and how many Judy Browns? And they're trying to separate them all so that they're all accurate. Now they are also trying to pull in ORCID information and provide information to ORCID. So as we saw with Dr. Spangler, you can go to Scopus and say, yes, pull my information from Scopus into my ORCID. Scopus can never do it without you saying yes and you checking that information. So there is a way to go into both Scopus and Web of Science to clean up what they think is yours. And then they'll have their own identification number for you, as well as your ORCID, so that they can talk to each other. Okay. So let's look at. So we're in the database called Scopus, which you can get to through the library because we subscribe to it. So this is Dr. Coccoli's Scopus author profile. So it's based on all the journal articles that Scopus knows about, which are many, and gives all these metrics and things, and then lists articles and provides links to them that Dr. Coccoli has authored. That's the word I'm looking for. So when you go back to ORCID and we're looking at Dr. Coccoli's ORCID profile, under their works, you can see, again, we kind of saw this already with Dr. Spangler. This article description came from Scopus instead of Crossref. Several of their articles have come through Scopus, so Scopus must index a lot of the journals where Dr. Coccoli prefers to publish. So that's all that means. You're all being very patient. Thank you. I hope the benefits of managing your scholarly author presence are kind of obvious by now. I've kind of been hinting at them, or Gina and I have both outright stated them, I believe. You need to be uniquely identified to peers, potential funders, employers, potential employers, colleagues, your aunt and your uncle, for all I know. And you're going to need to spend some time on it. It's not like you have to retype everything every time you need to do it. Doing this work should save you time down the pike. You know, if you can keep your ORCID up to date, then when the next time there's a grant application, you can just kind of give them your ORCID and say, this is what I've done. That's what I hope happens in the future. It probably isn't happening right now, but that's what we're all working towards with grant identifiers and organization identifiers and article identifiers and author identifiers. So we need to identify you. It does give you a professional looking page that you don't even need to format. And again, you want to be identified uniquely, but also correctly. You don't want someone to look at a list of your articles and say, oh, they're doing great work in, 3D representation of biophysical um, organ organelles in certain kinds of organisms, but I don't understand why they wrote this policy paper about climate change. So you don't want that kind of thing to happen at this point. You want your stuff to be there without anybody else's contaminating it. Maybe fine work, it's just not yours. So how to get started? These are my suggestions to an audience I do not know. If you're going to go down the academic research path, get that ORCID. Once you set up your ORCID, you can start with a cross-ref search. You can pull in information from Scopus and Publons or Web of Science. Check it every once in a while. And if you submit to a journal article, if you submit a journal article manuscript to a publisher or submit a grant application to a funder and they don't require an ORCID, give it to them anyway, and then suggest that they start using it. So you have some leverage in this system, and the more that you speak out, the more this will be used. If you're going to go down a career path that you think will be more about networking and building a big network, then you want to make sure you have a Google Scholar profile. Get that Google account, set up a Google Scholar profile, train Google to know that it's you and not the other person whose name looks like yours. And it'll get better and better over time. At least the Google Scholar algorithm really does learn, I believe. Now, of course, it's not an either or. I have both. Many people have both. In fact, I think all three faculty we looked at have at least an ORCID and a Google Scholar profile, so it's not unusual. And then when Gina shares out the slides, you'll get all the links. We have a research guide from the Sheridan Libraries that will help you get started with that. Links to Scopus and Google Scholar. So I think I'm kind of at the end of my jabbering at my own screen. That's the only part about Zoom presentations I don't like. So how much made no sense whatsoever and you have questions, let me know.
I think a lot of it made a lot of sense, and I certainly didn't know a lot about it. I am moderating a talk tomorrow on healthcare analytics, and one of the interesting things about that industry is one of their goals is to help identify across the world if there's a scientist studying a very rare, very low occurring disease, or the disease that's plaguing 80% of the population. I'm assuming things like this, and they're using these data analytics to pull from ORCID and other places. This is how you could be potentially identified and included in those trials, in that research. So it's very interesting.
I can tell y'all from the reporter journalism PR standpoint, I mean, I actually have an ORCID ID too. So it's really nice about it, I don't have any journal articles published out there. I've been in some acknowledgement sections, which is nice, but what's wonderful about it is when I have one, so you can actually, if you decide you want to write your own op-ed and chronicles of higher education because you got an opinion about, some, you can upload that to ORCID. It allows you to upload pretty much any kind of writing to that platform. It's not just your journal articles. So there's that side. And then on the other side, I do know that, and I don't know how widespread it is, but I have heard of reporters and journalists using ORCID to find experts in a particular field and finding, whether they're near them or whether they're far away. So there are people out there using ORCID other than just scholarly researchers or academics and whatnot. I have found it to be very, very interactive. Does anybody have any questions for Robin? I have a couple, but I'm willing to let other people to interject if they wish before me.
Is the H, and I should probably know this, but is the H index specific to Google Scholar? Is that something that they generate?
The H index is a very simple calculation that tries to indicate how strong a publisher you, or how strong an author you are, because it deals with how many articles you have and how many citations there are to those articles. It's not limited to Google Scholar. In fact, it was created years ago by a physicist. So Scopus can calculate an H index for you based on the information they have. Google Scholar will calculate an H index for you based on the information they have. Hence, the H indexes may not be the same.
Right. Okay.
Science, and from the librarian's point of view, it's not a worthwhile number. It is used constantly,
Yep.
but there are many problems with it.
Now, Robin, are all the platforms you talked about today, are they all free platforms? Is there any sort of, are you aware of that? I don't, like ORCID, there was never paying. I know for ORCID, there's no paying. And I can't imagine Google Scholar is. I mean, I think you, like you said, you just have to have a Gmail. I really don't know many people that may not have one, but it's possible. But I'm not sure about the other ones. If you have to, if you were not a member, if you had to pay, or could you still search if you were not a member at all, if you're looking for information?
Right. Yes. So yeah, ORCID is always free. My snarky comment about Google Scholar maybe eventually wanting payment is because it's still beta and it's supported by, I think, 3 whole people at Google, and they keep threatening every once in a while saying, oh, we don't know if you really want it or not. And we're all like, yes, we do. Of course, Microsoft just shut down Microsoft Academic Network. So who knows what's going to happen. Scopus is a database that you have to pay to get access to. And so you all currently have access through the library's subscription to that. And that's the link on the final resource. Web of Science is also a subscription database you have access to through the library. But this Publons is their public facing information about authors. It won't let you get to the articles, but Publons is free to use. But it's based on the Web of Science information. And Scopus also allows authors who may not be at an institution that subscribes to still have access and curate their author profile from a public point of view. So you shouldn't have to pay to do that, any of what I have talked about.
Okay. Are there various, I mean, I think we all we understand, some of us, there's parts of our digital identity we're comfortable with sharing. Some people maybe not so much. So do all these platforms have any kind of privacy settings that maybe you're aware of? Options, if you're not sure, something else.
Scopus and Web of Science, no, there's no way to privacy setting. I mean, the whole point is you published it in a journal, or a book, and we're going to use that information. Google Scholar, boy, it's been a while since I've actually gone into the back end of that. There might be a way, I know you can, there might be a way to suppress things. There's certainly ways to tell it, this is not my article, take it off. So there
Okay.
must be a way to, even if all you do is throw it away because you just don't want it to appear. ORCID, I'm going to do something here. Let me. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to go to orcid.org. Nope, I can't type, can I? So I'm going to sign in and we'll look at my ORCID. And actually, when you go to ORCID, Hopkins has a membership, so you can access through your institution, so you don't have to create your own, another username and another password. Yay. So now I'm in ORCID as Robin. Thinking, not what I want it to do. I don't want it to think. There we go. Okay, so when you're in the back end of ORCID, which we are now, I'm in my record in ORCID, and I can make things change and things like that. So what you're always going to see over here is who can see this? Everyone, trusted parties, or only me. So you can make any one part of your ORCID public or not. So you can do that with absolutely everything. So where I went to school, things like that. And it's funny because I actually have a lot of works that nobody can see, because as a young librarian back in the day, I wrote a lot of book reviews, which did get indexed in Web of Science and got thrown into ORCID. But nobody cares about my book reviews. I don't care about my book reviews. And the way they're cited, it makes it look like I wrote the books, not the review of the book, which is not any impression I want to give anybody. So they're all like down here. So see, this is locked. So, you know, again, I wrote a book review about the Encyclopedia of Autism Spectrum Disorders. I did not write the encyclopedia. So nobody should see this. This is not good information. So yes, it is possible in ORCID. And that's the whole point. ORCID is like, we're not going to ever create an ORCID for you. They started way back in the beginning, about 12 years ago when they started, they thought, maybe we should do this for people so that they're more likely to help. And then it just didn't work. So it's just like, no, you have to create your ORCID and then maintain it. There are plenty of people who have more than one ORCID because they forgot that they had to create it 3 years ago because the journal required it, and then they never looked back because they didn't need it for the next 3 years. So there are ways to fold them all back together if you do find out you end up with more than one ORCID. So did that help?
Yes, it did. It did. Does anybody else have any questions for Robin? You can unmute yourself and ask. If you'd like to put in the chat, you can do that as well. If not, I'm going to continue maybe to ask questions on your behalf. And Franklin, if you have more questions, feel free to jump in as well. I did notice, like you said, Google Scholar offered some analytics for people. People like to know, you know, who's looking at my article, and usually when they, whichever journal they publish in, you know, they can offer analytics like who's looking at my paper and how many people use my paper in their paper. And I noticed it in Google Scholar. Does ORCID or any of the other platforms offer anything in terms of like who searched for my name or anything like that? How many people looked me up at least? Maybe not if they're citing me, but are people looking me up?
No, that's more of a LinkedIn or a ResearchGate kind of thing, but ORCID, no. ORCID is simply a registry. no bells, no whistles, except for getting information in and letting you deal with it. And Scopus and Web of Science are just publication indexes. So
now, once people, you know, you know, if you haven't been actively using any of these platforms, you know, it will take some time to just
yeah,
get them up to date. You know, I always want to always make sure you have a nice headshot. You know, I really recommend that if you're able to get one, maybe your home department has a photographer, or you have a really good friend who take a really nice headshot. I don't recommend the one in the car that everybody like sees in the back of your car. You know, get a really nice headshot, and maybe it's just you're doing a little bit at a time. You're uploading a headshot. You're making sure your name's correct. You know, you're making sure your papers from maybe the last year were done, and maybe you know, I want people to find a mechanism that works for you. So, for example, like Robin's going to make her slides available to us, so I will make sure y'all get it. So maybe use her slides as a guide, like, okay, the first one she talked about was ORCID, so I'm just going to focus on this one first. And once you get everything up to date, then you can go on to say maybe Google Scholar, or the other way around. But Robin, do you think because we want you to have these all established before you graduate, remember? So once those are established, is there any recommendation on how often you should be, you know, like checking up on your profile to make sure things are being uploaded correctly? I'm a nerd. I totally set reminders, like go check your profile here and make sure it's up to date. I send actual reminders on my phone, so there's a beeping that actually tells me, or my Outlook. So should they check maybe just quarterly, you know, 4 times a year, 3 times a year?
well,
It seems more, especially with ORCID and Google Scholar, at least, like it's once you start adding your ORCID ID to things, it's again because it's polls for you, it makes your life so much easier.
it does. Generally, I think, based on me and the people I've been talking with over the years for this, most of the time it's not so much frequency, it's there's an event. I published an article. I want to make sure it got into ORCID. Is it in Crossref yet? Did it get to ORCID yet? Is it in Google Scholar? Has Google Scholar found it? Why didn't Google Scholar find it? Now, the one you might want to actually update or check in on every once in a while, even if you haven't published, is Google Scholar, because it silently adds things there that you may or may not have published because somebody's name was similar enough to yours. So Google Scholar might be one you want to look at more frequently the more common your name is. Yeah. But ORCID, I think you really only need to check when something's happening, when the interview is coming up, when the grant application has been approved, and then you want to make sure that that's, you know,
that's good advice.
reflected.
I like it.
Yeah.
Or you're going to be presenting at a conference.
Yes.
Yeah. By the way, people, I have noticed ORCID IDs on people's business cards, so people do put it on there too. So something to add.
Yeah. Oh, and I will say that going forward, if you have questions, if you have trouble doing any of this, getting into Scopus or updating ORCID or your Google Scholar profile or things like that, the person in the library to reach out to is your department or school librarian. You know, so if you are with INBT, then it would be Sue Vasakis. If you're with Earth and Planetary Sciences, it would be Steve Stitch. But you know, that they're perfectly capable of helping you through all of this.
I think you made a good plug there, because I'm not sure everybody knows that their department has a specific librarian, or their school has a specific librarian. It's that easily to find on just on the Sheridan Library's website.
Let's see. Let me show you.
Okay.
Come on. Oh, my internet must be slowing down. Okay, so the Sheridan Library's homepage is just library.jhu.edu. And if you go to library departments, the department with all the librarians is academic liaison. So if you scroll down, there's a list of our librarians and then their subject areas. So you may just want to, you know, do a find on the page if you're in, say, I can't, biophysics. Or, oh yeah, so chemical and biomolecular engineering is right here. So that would be Steve. Excuse me. So that's how you find out.
Wonderful. Franklin, do you have any final questions for Robin? Or if anybody else has any final questions for Robin, or else we're gonna wrap up our workshop here.
Yeah, I think that's it. There's definitely a lot to explore here. I'm definitely going to go in, and I haven't set any of this up, so I have to certainly go through and start adding things. I'm sure questions will come up, so I'd be happy to certainly formulate some more as I go through.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robin, for being here. You said we're recording this. I will make this available to everyone. I will make sure I will email everybody with the slides so you can get started. Contact your librarian if you have any questions and get started, or just more advice. Otherwise, we want to thank our speaker for coming. We want to thank everybody else for coming, and we hope you'll attend the rest of the workshops, and we will email you letting you know when they're coming up. Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you, Franklin, and thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. Thank you, Virginia, for helping set this up. Thank you guys for attending.
Thank you. Bye-bye.